This goes out to YouTube. So we'll do both. Okay. Dutchman and his coffee are seldom parted. I'll give you a stand for your.
That's very hospitable of you.
Now we're using two mics. This mic doesn't actually go out to you. This mic goes to you. This mic goes out to YouTube because one of the things that we've figured out over the years is that YouTube and the internet is very picky about sound. So that's why this will get better sound for the recording, hooked up to the computer, so on and so forth.
We could just make do with one mic if all of you were just sitting a little closer to the front like all our other fans do.
One of the things I realized, so here's a story. We get to Ireland, and we're going to do this event in this room, and the room is just set up with this long, all the chairs facing forward and everything to the front. John walks in the room and says, "Have you ever thought of moving the chairs and doing it this way?" No, we never have, so we did. That's just one little anecdote about our trip to Europe.
Yeah, we could do that here too.
I know we could. We've had these chairs actually many different ways over the years. Anyway, thank you all for gathering this afternoon. You can move seats as John would like you to, or you can stay where you're at. I wanted to, when I talked to the elders about the trip this summer, they said, you know, it would be really good if you could sort of give a little report about this trip, about Estuary, about all of the things that we've done, because you know, during the week, everybody's going about their business, but during the week, I'm on YouTube a lot, and a lot has gathered over the last 4 years via my experience on YouTube, and I know most of you don't watch YouTube, and I'm not encouraging you to, but it has become a big part of this church. It's actually become an increasing part of the financial support of this church, and Estuary, I think, is something that hopefully will impact churches around the world, and John Van Donk has been a big part of that. So I thought maybe a formal time to talk about Estuary, to talk about our trip to Europe, about how this whole came about, what we did in Europe, might be a good thing. So maybe we should run the clock all the way back and go back to when I watched a video. I think it was, I saw on a blog some mention about a Canadian psychologist who was causing a lot of commotion. And then I noticed that this Canadian psychologist named Jordan Peterson was making videos about the Bible. And so I decided that, I know a little something about the Bible. I know a little something about commentaries, because one of the things, how I prepare for sermons during the week, is I read the Bible, and part of what I often read in preparation for the sermon, as you saw in the sermon today, are commentaries. And I thought, what if I did a little commentary on Jordan Peterson's treatment of the Bible on YouTube? And I had been playing around with YouTube thanks to Freddie. Freddie and I had been making the Freddie and Paul show for about a year before then. And I thought, why not? Let's see what happens. And so I made a little video about Jordan Peterson, about 20 minutes long, and I put it on YouTube. And I'd had about 15 subscribers on YouTube. And a day later, I had 300 subscribers on YouTube. And I thought, well, that's weird. And then I thought, well, maybe I'll do another little video about Jordan Peterson and see what comes with that. And then more and more people started to watch, and people started to send me emails. Rick came by the church after I had my first Sunday, after I had my first video, and came in and introduced himself and gave me a little gift. And Rick and I have been friends ever since. And so that little video started something rolling. And John, I had met John on another little online forum called CRC Voices, which is a listserv, which is basically an email chain that talked
where Paul does most of his talking in writing. Can you imagine?
So where I had for years, I'd been on that listserv for about 20 years, and then John came on, and John came on with a lot of interesting ideas. And I started mentioning Jordan Peterson stuff on CRC Voices, and he picked up on that. And so that's where we kind of started talking. When did you first sort of contact me in that time?
Well, we knew each other vaguely from Voices, but my in-laws live in Dixon, which is about 20 miles from here, and we would be in the area regularly, and I just thought maybe it'd be fun to just go see Paul. And so we did. And at that time, I was starting a Jordan Peterson meetup group in my neck of the woods. I had coffee with Paul at the Stagecoach just down the road here, where he always, where his other office is there at the Stagecoach. And so then we got to talking. I said, you ought to start a YouTube meetup, or you ought to start a Jordan Peterson meetup group. Nah, I don't think that'll work. So, well, I'm doing it where I'm at. Well, next thing you know is he has a Jordan Peterson meetup group, and it turned out pretty nice. And so he uses his YouTube channel to let people know about the Jordan Peterson meetup group, and sure enough, a whole bunch of people show up. Now, by that time, Paul already had done enough YouTube stuff to have, 5, 6, 7, 8,000 subscribers?
No, by January it was probably only a couple thousand.
A couple thousand, okay, but just the same. Yeah, enough. So then I started I had started a group and it was going slow. Then I said to Paul, Paul, when you're in town for classes or something, can you come and join me at my meetup? And so this was in October, I think, that you showed up. That was the October classes meeting. So in October, I don't know how many subscribers you had in October, but he showed up for my meetup, and 20 people showed up at my meetup. I says, hey, there is a direct correlation between Paul Vanderklay showing up at my meetup and the number of people that show up for the meeting. By that time, that laid this fundamental first seed about the correlation between your celebrity on YouTube with the number of people that we can drum up to show up for an event. And that actually was, you can take it from there.
Well, so I started in January because John poked me at this. Rick was on me too. He's like, oh, you should start a meetup. And I'm like, I don't know if anybody will come. I had met with some people in Sacramento who wanted to talk to me because of the videos. And so then I got a meetup.com account and I put it on there, and a dozen people showed up. And I thought, wow. Because we'd done Vacation Bible School. I mean, we've done all kinds of stuff to have people come in here, and usually they'll come in, they'll eat a hot dog, or they'll get free babysitting for their kids, or something like that. But I actually had a dozen people come in just because of one posting, and we had substantive conversations that, for me as a pastor, I felt were significant in the kinds of conversations I wanted to have with people. I mean, it's nice to run VBS or a Harvest Festival or something like that. Most of the time out of that, we got very little contact. But we did it in January, so I'll do it again in February. And we had about 20 people show up. Some people didn't come again, but we had a whole new crop of people that came. And some of those people that came the second month have basically sort of stayed in the circle the whole time. And so I immediately saw the possibility of increasing the number of productive conversations I could have with people that were not going to church, had no interest in the church, but they would come into the building, we would have conversations, and so then every month, and for a while twice a month, I was running these meetups, and we'd get anywhere from 20 to 40 people coming in here. And so we had a variety of ways to break people up. We were sort of struggling how to run a meeting, tried a bunch of different things. And John at the same time was doing his meetups in Southern California. New meetups were starting. We had one in Fresno. We had one who was done by a former youth pastor. The church in Alameda wanted to get some meetups going. I had some other clergy that were interested in this because it seemed like a worthwhile thing to do. And so more and more we were sort of traveling around to try to encourage people to start meetups and encourage churches to start hosting them, because churches during the week have empty space. We have chairs that can go in a circle. Pastors and other church leaders have experience with small groups. So it seemed like a very natural fit. And then John got in his idea that we're going to do a West Coast tour.
I love road trips. I might like to point out to you that today is the first day of Ann and myself, our first big road trip that we've ever done together. Like, we're going to go all the way up to northern British Columbia and come back down. So the idea of a road trip is, I love the idea of a road trip. I've done 10,000 miles with another friend, so we like to do road trips. Anyway, so then Paul invited his friend Job, whom I had never met before, and he showed up. And so, yeah, in March of 2020, we were going to do Paul's fourth missionary road trip, Paul's fourth West Coast missionary road trip. Wasn't that what it was called?
It's Paul's fourth missionary journey, but
Paul's fourth missionary journey.
The Apostle Paul didn't use a large SUV like John has. So Job, from between when I started the channel and this road trip, Job, I'd had a succession of conversations with Job from the Netherlands, and in the conversations I had with him on YouTube. So what happened was I started doing videos, people contact me, I'd say, oh, Paul, and they're sending me emails, and I'm writing emails back and forth. Then others were contacting me, Paul, I want to have a conversation with you. Okay, so then we talk via Skype or Zoom or something like that. And then Job, I had successive conversations with, and I asked, can I share these? He's like, sure. First one he edited, next ones we just posted. And in the process, Job became a Christian. And what's fun about the video conversations is you just sort of watch that succession happen. And so then Job had to come to Southern California when I had met Job. Job is from the Netherlands. This guy talks Dutch. So I thought maybe Job and John Van Donk can strike up a friendship. And of course, sure enough, they did. And Job was coming to Southern California for a work thing.
An ADA conference.
Yeah. And staying with John, and then this guy schemes up, well, let's take a road trip, and let's go all the way up north, up into Canada, and back down again. And I'm like, you know, John, I have a day job, and Sundays are kind of tying me down here. So he said, well, we'll see how few Sundays we can sort of bother, and we'll get as much road trip in as we can. That was March of 2020. And you all know what else happened in March of 2020.
So we split the road trip up into two parts, the southern part and the northern part. And so when Job arrived, we first went to Tucson, Arizona, and then we did 3 locations in Southern California, and we were getting ready. Oh, and then he had his conference, and after the conference, we were going to come up north. And that was on the 15th of March of 2020. We had several phone calls back and forth, Paul and I. Shall we go? Shall we not go? Shall we go? Shall we not go? Turned out we were not going to go because all up and down the coast, everything was being shut down. All events were canceled. Job's conference was even canceled while he was here. So then it was quite difficult to get him back home. He was the last person, I think, to fly out of Los Angeles to Holland. It was a totally empty airport. There was nobody there, and we walked in, and he got on one last flight out to go to Holland. So anyway, we canceled the northern part of the Paul's fourth missionary road trip, and so these people are all waiting for us to show up now.
Yeah, and of course we didn't go.
We didn't go.
And COVID came, and everything got shut down, but obviously when everything got shut down because of COVID in person, YouTube kept going. And so Zoom. And so I kept doing what I'd been doing on YouTube, and the channel continued to grow. And the guys who had set up, who had been here at the local meetup, said, we'd really love to share this kind of thing with more people. So they started a Discord server, and we sort of gathered a number of people through that Discord server. And we knew at some point that COVID was going to go away, or at least release its grip, and we could do something else. And I had talked with John about going to Europe at some point. I had never been to Europe. And, well, then once I had kind of, the way it goes with John and I is once I kind of say an idea and open the door a crack, John sticks his foot in and keeps pushing. And so I said, well, at some point we could go to Europe. And, well, let's back up with the Estuary stuff. So we had these meetups going. We're helping other groups start meetups, helping other meetups start in different churches. And there's a question about how to facilitate these groups. how to sort of help the group have a good experience, because my experience here was sort of hodgepodge. Some weeks were better than others. Some people talk too much. Some people dominate the group, some of that. And along the line, John kind of came up with what I dubbed, even though he didn't like the name, the Estuary Protocol, which was sort of a way of facilitating one of these meetings and letting everybody talk and having everybody listen and have the meeting run in a rather satisfying way. And so we talked about this, and we talked about what it would take to actually get more and more of these groups going. And we thought, well, people practicing, you need leaders. But I said to John, I don't have enough time to start training leaders for all these groups. So John thought of this online thing that he later called ElseNet. Why don't you describe that?
Well, we got to squeeze one other thing in between, because so far we've been talking about Jordan Peterson meetup groups. And what is the relationship between a Jordan Peterson meetup group and the church? And Paul was kind of thinking that through, kind of on his own a little bit, because I don't know where he came up with the idea, but all of a sudden we were having conversations about Estuary. And Paul came up with the name Estuary as a way to rebrand Jordan Peterson meetup groups to become Estuary groups. And you want to talk about what an estuary is, or shall I?
You can.
An estuary is where the river meets the ocean. Those of you from Holland will know that all of Holland is an estuary. Those of you from the Sacramento Delta know that the entire Sacramento Delta is an estuary. Wherever the rivers meet the ocean, where fresh water meets the salt water, and the image that came to our mind is how the space between the church and the world is like an estuary. Constantly changing landscape, kind of chaotic, a little dangerous, weird creatures live there. And so that whole image of the estuary kind of came alive in Paul's imagination, and I found it very easy to link up to that. And at that time, I had actually gotten permission from my church in Chino, also a Christian Reformed church, to start Conversations on the Edge, which is a way for me to put my Jordan Peterson meetup group in the church setting. And the elders had a conversation about that, and they approved it. And so it's on the website, and you could go to Conversations on the Edge at Crosspoint Church. But I immediately, when Paul came up with the name Estuary, I immediately asked for permission to rebrand that. So now Crosspoint Christian Reformed Church in Chino has an estuary in the church. So.
And the idea of estuary very much came out of my long years here. You all know very well that my office door is right there, and before we built the fence, had a lot of traffic at my office door all the time, a lot of traffic on the phone. People needing help with money for rent, homeless people looking for $20, homeless people just needing someone to talk to, people in trouble with this or that or this or that. But most of the kind of conversations I want to have with people are about things that matter to me. Things about God, things about meaning, things about what life is really about. And I found that I'd have dozens of conversations about somebody's need for gas in their tank or food on their table or $20, all of which is fine, all of which I have absolutely no problem attending to, but too few conversations about who are you really? What matters in this world? What is life about? The really big questions. And I always wanted an opportunity to have better discussions with people who are either Christians or non-Christians or some other religion or far from God, whatever. I wanted to have more of these conversations. And what had happened during the Jordan Peterson meetups, my YouTube stuff, is that now suddenly, probably most of you don't know it, one of the things that I started was very quickly, I was having conversations with random people on the internet. People say, Paul, I want to talk to you. Okay. So then we record it. And then after the recording, I'd say, is this something you would be willing to let me share? And so some of those conversations I would share on my channel. People started watching those. They called them randos, because these are nobodies on the internet. They're having a conversation with me, and that's going on. And the truth is, pretty much every week, I have a certain number of slots where anybody in the world can sign up for a 1-hour conversation with me and talk about anything they want to talk about. And I do that almost every week. And about half of those conversations get shared on my channel. And for a group of people on my channel, those are the favorite part of the conversations because you get a slice of real life. And you have people giving their stories like, I grew up in the church, and then I couldn't really believe in God anymore. But then this other thing happened in my life, or I watched a video or something like that, and now I'm not so sure and I want to talk about that. I was dying for years to have more conversations like this. Could never arrange it. I watched church planters getting some more of that in various ways that they were planting churches here. And then suddenly via YouTube, via the Randos Conversations, and then via the Estuary meetings, the meetups, I get more opportunity for that than I actually have time to pursue. So then part of my goal was, I want to open this up so more people can have these conversations, and I want to encourage churches to host these groups because I dare bet there are a lot of pastors like me who would love to have better conversations with people all across the spectrum, but never get the chance to. And if via Estuary I can make that happen, that seems like a good ministry. So Estuary was the word.
And then we should probably also squeeze in here to accommodate Grab It Heist that there is such a thing as the Discord server and the Bridges of Meaning thing that happened as a result of Paul's YouTube ministry. Because the guys here in Sacramento are kind of high-tech, and they're very able to do things online in the gamer community. And so the Discord server is something that is probably as big in the world as is Facebook or Twitter, or maybe not quite that big, but it's pretty big in the gaming community, and that is where gamers get together for a chat. They talk to each other while they're playing the games. And these guys, they set up a special section of that thing and called it the Bridges of Meaning. And that became, during COVID, a meeting place where a lot of people had the opportunity to have meaningful conversation amongst themselves virtually, so online. And actually, the success of that Discord server always irritated me. Because, as Paul often says, I'm a little bit dogmatic, and I'm a one-trick pony. I always think that people do better when they can see each other face to face. You guys come to church so you can meet your friends and talk face to face. And so all along, and that whole movement has kind of shifted, even on the Discord server, attempts are now being made to group people locally, so at least you create the opportunity of them to get together at times. Estuary, all the way from its very inception, from the very beginning, was always intended to be local, in person, on the ground, for me at least. Now, the Discord server continues to be functional, and a lot of people are getting together online and having meaningful conversations. But Estuaries try to put on a little bit of competition so that more and more people try and get together with people in their immediate surrounding and do things on the ground, in person, where you can eat pie.
And part of this also grew out of my experience with church planters. Because one of the things, all you really need to plant a church is a leader. You're going to need a space. There's a bunch of other stuff you're going to need eventually, but you need a leader.
Oh, yeah, that's what I was supposed to.
And I knew, yeah, we'll get back to that. And I knew that if we were going to really multiply this Estuary movement, we needed leaders. And like I said, I don't have time. I'm already running this YouTube channel. I'm already doing the Randos Conversations. I already have Living Stones. I don't have time to run a leadership training program for Estuary. And so I said, Dave and Donk, why don't you do that? So that's what he did. He developed this whole thing.
And Paul has a way of colonizing your head. He does that, with ease. And so I simply do what he tells me to. And I started the ELSNet thing, which is the Estuary Leader Support Network. I'm sorry. And what that is we gather twice a month online for a 2-hour period, and I have 3 separate groups that meet that way. So that's a total of 12 hours a month for me, in which basically what I do is I conduct an estuary meeting according to the estuary protocol so that the people that participate in these sessions online become very comfortable with the estuary protocol so they can practice it. Every time we get together, there's always some mention of our either the group that we have already started, that already exists, or the group that we would like to start, or the group that we plan to start, or the group that way down the road we hope to start, but there's always talk about starting a group. So these leaders, I encourage them to reinforce in each other the idea of, yes, the reason why we're here to do this, the reason why we practice the estuary protocol is because one day we may need it on the ground to actually do this leadership protocol, this estuary protocol with a group of people in our community. And example A is sitting right over there, a guy that has been part of our ElseNet group for some time already, sitting way over there, Josiah Gorder, and he has 2 estuary groups going already. So I'm very proud of him.
So our goal was to start these groups and to get this stuff going. And John, with his ElseNet, people would say, I'm kind of curious about estuary. I'd send them to John, and then they would start in the groups. And I would also continue to get inquiries about starting a group, so on and so forth. Well, another guy, like Job, Matthias, I'm never the proper way to say it. Is it Matthias or Matthias?
Matthias.
Matthias is in Germany, and Matthias, similar to Job, he was friends with a Mennonite missionary in Germany, and he sort of found my channel, and I did a Randall's conversation with him, and he very quickly picked up on this, and he started his own group in Germany. And he got his group going. And another thing that's been developing from these groups, completely apart from us, is groups have their little meetings where a group of them get together, but the groups sort of figured out that if every year they sort of do a big event, they can get more interest in their meeting. And that was part of the reason I was traveling, because as John noted, when I come down to Southern California, by virtue of my YouTube channel, more people would come to his group when I was there than when he wasn't there. I would basically say to groups, if you want to start a group, I'll try and get out there for your first meeting and be able to gather half dozen or a dozen people, and maybe you can get some traction to get your group started.
He learned it from the Apostle Paul, actually.
I haven't been stoned anywhere, so that's good. But
Is that actually true?
I have not been stoned.
You've never been stoned?
No, nobody has ever tried to stone me.
Just checking.
Okay. So then these groups are starting to start bigger events. And Matthias quite rightly said, if we're going to do this group, we have to do it in German. So they're doing their group in the German language. And then they're going to do this festival in Germany, because festivals are things that Germans do. And they invited a guy who I've talked to who lives in Tbilisi, Georgia. He was going to come out. And I was talking to Matthias, and he said, well, if we could pay your airfare and cover your expenses, would you be willing to come out to Germany and participate in our festival? And I thought, I had already asked the council for a certain number of weeks each year to do this kind of work, and they had said yes. And so I said, yeah, I could do that. So I mentioned that to John. And of course,
he invited himself.
He invited himself. So we had talked about going to Europe, but John immediately grabbed the idea and ran with it. So what was going through your head, John?
Well, no, actually, you were the one who actually made it, caused the expansion, because Paul said all along, well, if we're going to be in Europe and our plane tickets are paid for, we may as well stretch it as long as possible. Well, I'm the wrong person to say that to, because I have connections all around Europe, and I can make things happen in different places. And so I had about a month and a half planned for Paul. So if it were up to me, you would have been without a pastor last summer for maybe 5 or 6 weeks. Paul, because he loves you dearly and cannot, like a good dependent person, cannot get away from you for any length of time, feels very responsible for this congregation. He said, no, John, maybe 2 Sundays at the most. And so we planned our activities and our whole journey around those 2 Sundays that Paul felt he could be away. And then the challenge was, okay, well, what are we going to do in the time allotted from beginning to end around these 2 Sundays? Well, I have connections in Holland. We could make something happen there. Paul has connections in the United Kingdom and in Britain, in Ireland. So he made some phone calls and some connections. The interesting thing is that there was really only one thing fully organized when we landed in Schiphol. The festival in Germany.
Nobody knows here what Schiphol is.
All of you, raise your hand if you know where Schiphol is. So anyway, that was in the Netherlands, but only one event was fully organized when we landed in Schiphol, the Netherlands, and that was the event in Germany. All the other events were in the process of being organized as we were traveling, and it was a fascinating experience because we were flying by the seat of our pants most of the way. Paul is a great guy to fly on the seat of your pants with.
I don't get anxious, but we sort of opened our schedule book to the internet, and the internet filled it. And John right away, John is a Hollander, and those of you who've had experience with Hollanders know they pinch the pennies and they like to make them go far. And so John said to me right away, he said, "You won't believe how economically we're going to be able to do this trip," which meant for the most part we're sleeping in people's homes. We did wind up spending at least one night in a car. We did a lot of things.
You have to mention that?
Yeah, that was the whole scene. And so what we did was basically a bunch of people were interested in us coming together, talking about Estuary. How to pay for the trip was sort of built on when I would go for doing something like the festival or some other events where I was speaking. Those would usually get me a few $100s, and then I could use that money to sort of defer the expenses of some of the other things. And the main Estuary festival picked up a lot of those other expenses. So
for the big picture, we pretty much broke even. So it was for expenses wise, it was a really nice experience for both of us. We didn't really spend a lot of money out of pocket, except me. We'll save that for later.
Okay. So that's how we went to Europe. We first landed in the Netherlands.
Job was a huge part of the picture in the Netherlands because Job has a car. Now, Job had intended to come and pick us up via train from Schiphol to go to his house in Sliedrecht because he thought that we should be exposed to the wonderful Dutch train system. I was more interested in something else, so I pleaded with Job, please do not come and pick us up by train. Bring your car. There is a very important detour that needs to be made on our way to your house. I have gone to the Netherlands many, many times. I have family there. My kids have gone there. We traveled there together. We have a little ritual that helps to convert for the time change. To get used to the time change, what you want to do is you want to make it the first day a long day and go to bed when everybody else goes to bed. Because if you take a nap as soon as you get off the plane, you're sunk. So I said, Job, please come and pick us up. And he did. And he took us to Scheveningen.
Which means nothing to them.
Scheveningen is a small little town next to The Hague. There is a fisher's harbor there. And I grew up there. I was born in the city of The Hague. And I have been to one particular herring stall for probably 10 times that I traveled to Holland.
And they don't know what herring is.
Herring is salted fish. It's very common in the Netherlands, and I could live on it for the rest of my life. That and peach pie and strawberry rhubarb pie. So anyway, Job took us there, and that was the occasion for Paul's initiation in eating Dutch salted herring. How did you feel about that, Paul?
I thought it was delicious. I enjoyed it very much. It's raw, by the way. It is raw fish.
It's
but
like
I've eaten plenty of sushi.
Yeah.
I had no problem with it. I was a little shocked, though, that so that day we flew out of here at Livingstone's. We drove all the way to the airport. Ann drove us to the airport. We get dropped off. We get on a plane. We fly all the way to Copenhagen and then to the Netherlands. And then, it's getting kind of long. Didn't sleep that much on the plane. First thing we do is drive to the beach. And I'm like, what are we doing at the beach? We're at the beach to eat raw fish. And that was sort of my first introduction into the Netherlands trip and how this thing was going to go. So then we did spend a couple of days. The next day that they had planned for us was a tourist day to sort of get us acclimated.
And to get Paul in touch with his roots. Because how many of you know that Paul, of his original heritage, is Jewish? You knew that? Yeah. So apparently, and I didn't know that, but Job helped us organize all this. We went to see the area of the country where Paul is from, and where some of his Jewish ancestors lived, and the kind of things that happened during the war there. It was very meaningful. There was a statue there of all the Jews of that particular town that had been, how do you say that online? Murdered?
Yeah.
Murdered by the occupants, the occupying army, and so we went to see that monument, and there were probably 5 or 6 Vanderklays on that thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so that was kind of meaningful for Paul to find out where his ancestors came from. And then we ate more herring.
Yes, we did. We ate a lot of herring. Not as much as he'd like, but we did. So we did go see an area where my ancestors lived and my distant cousins who were killed by the Nazis, memorial to them. So that was quite moving. And
all the while, people in another part of the country were organizing our first event, which was to be on Wednesday, which was a very interesting conversation with some scholars in Holland from the theological school, and they had a conversation about whether Estuary should be part of the church.
Yeah, we had a group conversation. I also did a Dutch podcast that wasn't a Christian podcast at all. That podcast wound up going very well, the New World podcast. So we did a kind of a panel discussion online, and then that evening we sort of had an Estuary event. How many people gathered for that event from the Netherlands?
Maybe 30, and then we had 2 groups of 10, and then a bunch more.
So then some of the people that I had spoken with over the last couple of years came to that, and we sort of had an Estuary meeting with all kinds of little subgroups in the Netherlands. And so that was really quite meaningful, a chance to meet people and give people a taste of what this little thing can do, and yeah.
And it also, again, was a seed in our minds as to what these bigger events could be and what they could serve, what purpose they could serve. And then we went to Ireland. No, after Germany.
First we went to Germany.
Then we went to Germany. Same thing. We had some Estuary group experiences and some lectures, and people got a taste of what this thing can be.
And we're not going to go through all the details, because actually at the end of the trip, John and I made a 2+ hour video where we talked about everything that happened on the trip, and that's on my channel. If you're curious, I can give you the link for that. So we had more events in Germany, and then we went up into the UK, and that was fascinating because, again, John had a contact from his ELSNet group who sort of arranged some of it. We had another place to stay, sort of a communal living situation. We went up to Ireland because someone that I had been speaking with wanted me to come up there in a Roman Catholic retreat center, and had a wonderful event there with a writer named Paul Kingsnorth. And then came back down to the UK. I did an event with Tom Holland, the author that you've seen me put his book Dominion on many of my slides. And then we just had a bunch of Estuary events in the UK.
Yep. And some related to churches, and some in youth hostels, and yeah. So one at the upstairs of a restaurant that was built in the mid-1600s. And we had our meeting in the attic of that old building, surrounded by these big old beams, and it was really cool.
So there were a couple different elements of the trip. Part of the trip was me doing speaking things, which were a little bit more formal. Those kind of helped pay the way for things. and then these estuary groups were just small groups, and giving people a taste for what a group like that could be, and then trying to give people some incentive to start their own groups. There's one really incredible Nigerian man in the UK who started 2 groups while we were there. One in Birmingham and one in Manchester.
Yep.
And so it was a way to just kind of encourage people and give them a vision for what these groups could do, and say, why not give a chance to sort of start them? And that's really what a lot of the trip was about. Yeah. After that trip, John thought he lost his passport, which kept him in the country a little longer. So he got to see a bunch of the events after the Queen's death and some of those things. I wasn't there for that, but John was there for that.
And to get home, I had to pick up the tab for my own return ticket, which if you buy it 3 days before you fly is about 25 minutes.
So John fortunately didn't try to make me responsible for the ticket because of his passport thing. He had to pay for that. But no, and so then I came back and I had a week back here, and then I went to Canada for a Thunder Bay conference, which again has grown out of this whole thing. Some of you know Eamon Wilson, his wife Catherine, had set up this conference in Thunder Bay, and that had originally been scheduled for September of 2020, but of course that was canceled. And that was a conversation between myself and John Vervaeke and Jonathan Peugeot, 2 other, one's a scholar from University of Toronto, the other's an icon carver. Both of them are on YouTube doing these kinds of things similar to what I'm doing. And so that's what I was doing in Canada, and that was an event of about 200 people that, again, they don't have an estuary group, but Eamon and Catherine Wilson very much wanted to get into the conversation. Her brother runs a place called Urban Abbey in Thunder Bay, Ontario, and saw a chance to do sort of a bigger event where they could, continue talking about some of these things. And I did an estuary taster there for about 100 people on that Sunday afternoon there too. So.
And I should say that every one of these events has resulted in more people signing up to be leaders or aspiring leaders on ElseNet. So now I regularly get to see these people when they show up to be trained in the estuary protocol and express the intent and the desire to start a group on the ground. And so from all of that perspective, this was extremely successful, because even if half the people that show up on ElseNet actually start a group on the ground, right now I have upward of 70 people that meet with me as part of ElseNet. So from around the world, Australia, Africa, all of Europe, and different places.
Some of you might remember I was in Australia for a similar thing in April of 2019. And so, we've had people all over the world doing this. And so the European tour was part of that. Now, one of the things that happened when we were in Europe is that people would say, well, are you coming back again next year? And it's like, we'll see. We'll see. John has been working on doing something in Southern California, having another large meeting.
Well, and that was actually a direct result of when Paul came back from Thunder Bay, and he said, I have found the formula. He said there need to be estuary groups on the ground and regional estuary hub events on a regular basis. So John, you're next. So he basically told me that we should organize an estuary hub event in Southern California. Fortunately, when we approached the 3 main celebrities for the Thunder Bay event and asked if they would come together again for another event in Southern California, all 3 said yes. So we are working on that to get a date on the calendar, and so we're going to do a kind of an encore of these guys being together, and that seems to almost automatically or predictably gather a crowd, and that's what we're going to do to inspire a few more people to start local estuary groups on the ground in their own communities, and that's what it's all about.
All right, anything more you want to say before we kind of open it up to questions to these guys? Okay, so there's kind of a fast presentation through this. I opened this up I told Rick we're going to live stream this on my channel. I have no idea. I've never live streamed on a Sunday afternoon, so I don't have any idea how many people are watching right now. But there's a bunch of the regulars aren't. There's a real difference between weekdays and weekends. A lot of the people who watch a lot of YouTube content are people who work in the tech sector or the trade sector, and they listen to a lot of YouTube at work, or if they're driving a truck, or if they're coding or something like that. So actually, weekend views are quite a bit less than midweek views. So, but I wanted to give a chance for questions from Living Stones, and those of you who are watching online, if you have a question, you can put it up in the chat section, and we'll try to answer it. Nash.
Could you go into some more detail about the specific types of conversations that you have in the Estuary conversations, and just like give us more of a feel for what you're talking about?
The Estuary protocol, which we really didn't lay out, but this was sort of the way that we conduct a meeting, is designed to basically allow a small group that's meeting to talk about what they want to talk about. We talk about whole ranges of things in Estuary meetings. Sometimes, because many of these people are watching the same people online in terms of videos, videos that I make, or Jonathan Peugeot, or Jordan Peterson, or John Vervaeke, or a number of other people, often people will have interest in talking about the kinds of topics that they talk about then. A lot of these conversations are about philosophy. Sometimes they go into religion. They usually have a lot to do with meaning, value, ethics. So they're kind of up here, or they usually start up here, sort of abstract. But one of the things that we've noted is that one way to judge the success of the group is people will start talking about abstract ideas, and then as they feel comfortable with each other, as they sort of begin to trust one another, the conversation will come down and get more personal. And that, to me, as a pastor, says, okay, now we're getting to a level that's really important, because, as I mentioned in the sermon, you know, there's some people that can talk about all of these really complex ideas, and they're important, but all of these really complex ideas only really get all the way through us when they get personal. So I don't know, Nash, we talk about so many different things in Estuary groups, it's kind of hard to...
Just throw a few examples out to give the people who don't go more a flavor of what they're like.
There are always, in my estuary, there is always a few people that bring up books they've read. There's also people who talk about relationships that they have with their parents, who may be more or less conservative than they themselves are, or more liberal, either way. There are often conversations about, some about current events, about what's in the news. You know, there is a little bit of pushback against some political person on the left or on the right that sometimes does come up. Yeah. The interesting thing is that we invite everybody to talk about what has been on their minds since the last time we met, and so that really can be very different from one person to the next. People feel free to share some things about their family, babies. Josiah shared with us when his little one was born, and he was a brand new dad, and how little sleep he got. So that was kind of cool. So, yeah.
We had, at our last Estuary meeting here at Living Stones, we had 4 teachers who were in attendance. And the teachers wanted to talk about some of their frustrations and difficulties in the public school that they didn't feel they could talk about at work. And that, for them, was a difficult thing. People do often bring in work topics. We try not to let groups get real political, just because too often political topics just sort of get stuck.
But most political topics have an underlying issue, and when you can get to those, that's kind of a good thing. You know, there are real values and policies underneath all the political wrangling, and if you can get to that, then you have something meaningful to discuss.
And, you know, for example, Raj, who has been, so I was quite busy for a while, and Josiah was interested in Estuary, and I said, Josiah, just jump into my groups and just get involved, and I'll help you get one started, and, you know, let's see how much you can go. And so one of the guys, I said, I'm going to send you some of these guys that are just A level in terms of Estuary guys. So Raj, he was on one of the slides on the sermon. You know, Raj is a Sikh that lives around here, and his grandma doesn't live far, and he'll often just stop by my door during the week when he's visiting his grandma, knock there. He teaches in prison, and he's been teaching 4th grade as a student teacher, and he's Sikh. And he likes to talk to me about what he notices in terms of the Sikh religion, and likes to compare notes between the Sikh religion and Christianity, between Jesus and some of the gurus. So conversations are all over the place.
One that stands out in my mind that actually was kind of a little bit of a surprise, and the surprise was how well it went. But we had one lady who was not associated with any church. She wanted to talk about abortion. And that was right during the time that abortion was hot and heavy in the news with the Supreme Court decision. And we had about 7 people present in the room, and that conversation turned out to be real beautiful, because we ended up talking about different ways in which you can support pregnant mothers, and all the different ways in which you can reduce the need for abortion, and also to speak respectfully about the pain that is associated on both sides of the spectrum. And so it was actually a very supportive and uplifting conversation, which oftentimes doesn't happen when abortion becomes the topic.
Part of what is key for Estuary, okay, I'll get you in a minute, Nancy.
There's a question up there too.
Okay. Part of what is key for Estuary is that a lot of church people think that when a topic comes up, it's the job of the pastor or the church to lean in heavy with the church answer to a problem. We don't do that in Estuary, because in my experience, and I learned this as a pastor here, if you too quickly lean in with an answer, you shut down the conversation, often because this isn't the first time they've had someone lean in heavy with an answer. And what many people are looking for is a space to process, and a space where
they can hear themselves think.
They can hear themselves think. And many times I have noted in Bible study groups here that if someone leans in too hard with an answer, just lights go out in people's eyes. Give people a chance to talk. They're never going to embrace something until at least at one level or another it becomes their idea. And so you have to give that space in the group. And so that's how, in some ways, Estuary is different from a Bible study. Where in a Bible study, I'll go through and I'll talk about, here's the text, here's the way the church has dealt with the text, maybe here's some competing ideas, yada, yada, yada. But an Estuary group is very different.
Mark Wesson-Witt from Ireland, I guess, wanted to know what our impressions were of Northern Ireland. And we had a lovely time there. Mark showed us around a little bit, and we ate in a few places, and it was all wonderful. But from my point of view, as an organizer of events, that abbey, that priory, the Benburb Priory, was the most incredible conference facility. You guys are sitting on a diamond over there, and Mark Connolly should take the best advantage of that he can. It has all the facilities. It's got a coffee shop, it's got dorms, it's got lodging facilities, parking, huge park around it, a river where you can go fishing, and it is just an amazing area to spend some time.
Nancy. Any that are interested, Nancy says, of all these 23,000 subscribers, are there any that are interested in?
In your Estuary.
Yeah. Oh yes, that's where these people come from when they show up for events.
Okay.
So Estuary has been,
I just thought that'd be a good tool.
Yes, yes. So that's why when I'd go to Southern California, more people would show up because they've seen me on YouTube.
That is the mechanism, yeah.
Freddie.
Yeah, okay. I got my 400 views. How do I get more views like you do, Mr. Paul? 400 views, sometimes 800. I want Skrilla. I want it up there.
There are many videos on YouTube that will give you advice how to get more views on your channel.
I know. I thought you were the main man.
No, he still doesn't know what happened to him.
No, and in fact, my goal is not necessarily to grow a big channel. What I really value are the interactions and the conversations. And what I'd really like, for some people, what they really need to do is watch less YouTube and have more and better face-to-face relationships and conversations.
So really what you're providing is a safe haven for people of all different backgrounds, all different baggage, to come to an area to open up their hearts freely until they all feel comfortable enough to really reveal themselves. And that's when the work begins. You have to get your heart up.
That's right. So not what Nina said was what you're really doing is providing people a space that they can come together, they can feel comfortable, they can open up their heart, and hopefully begin to trust one another, build a community. So many of the problems of this world, increasingly so, especially after COVID, people are isolated, people are lonely. When people are isolated and lonely, they turn on the TV or they turn on YouTube, they turn on a screen. That gives them, it's sort of like eating sugar. Gives them a little sense of being full and being fed, but you can't have a relationship with a screen.
And I think there has already been some conversation, and you guys pioneered that here in a way with the Jordan Peterson meetup group that refinished the floor of the sanctuary here and did a bunch of the work on the bushes out on the property. And there's talk about that in the leadership network also, that people say, okay, are we just going to sit around and talk, or are we going to actually do something? And so when people start talking that way, you know they own the group. They want to be together. They want to do things together. They want to eat meals together, and they want to have meaningful conversations together. So there's more to it than just the conversations. If the thing happens, some real little communities will start up.
And a lot of friendships have grown because of this, and that's key. I think it's hard. I mean, this congregation has a lot of people getting up in years. You all grew up before the internet. Y'all have had friends mostly apart and outside of the internet. Yeah, Facebook came along and you could see some pretty pictures, yada, yada, yada. But many of the people that have grown up since the internet has started are lonely. And this hopefully helps people build community. Any other questions?
Is there anything that's off limit that you talk about, and if it is, how do you stop it?
That's a good question.
Meanness
Is there any,
off limits.
she asked, because they can't hear online, she asked if there's anything that we talk about that is off limits.
Meanness is off limits. And there are some examples of people who insist on being mean, and they are asked to excuse themselves. And they are canceled, or they can be blocked from online activity, and a good leader will know how to deal with it on the ground also.
There's also a sense in which the group develops a sense that what people are doing has to feed the group. And you know this in a small group setting too. You notice when some people are helping build up the group. I mean, I just preached about it. Knowledge puffs up. Love builds up. And we don't get draconian, but what we want in the group is to help steer people towards treating each other in love, so that it builds up the group. And you've always got somebody who comes in who's got their head full of knowledge and they want to tell the group what's right and what's wrong and blah, 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 blah. That'll kill a group fast. And that's part of the reason that we have the way we go about building the conversation deters someone from the group from becoming, this is someone's soapbox.
And without mentioning any names at all, there is an example online in Paul's following of a person who has been quite mean and ugly and nasty to other people online and showed up in one of our Estuary meetings and was as pleasant and kind as a pussycat. So that in person, a whole different person from who he was online. So,
Any other questions? Well, I don't see any other questions in the group. We got a bunch of people on there. Fragmented dude person who I know, that's Chad. He says hi to Freddie. So you do have fans, Freddie. You do have fans. But thank you all for staying this extra time at church. I know for some of us, it's been a long day. I've been at church a number of hours, and I know some of you have too. Thank you, John, for traveling up from Southern California today. It's really wonderful.
no, it was on our way. This is the first stop of our road trip.
Okay, well, good. So
all good.
Rick's no longer in the little booth, so I'll have to run back there and hit the button. Thank you, Joey. You can just, end the transmission back there. So, and thank you all.